She had nothing but an empty womb and colder nights. He had children who missed a mother's voice. One offer, one look, and two broken souls stepped into something neither dared hope for home. The baby's cry was not hers, but she heard it in her dreams all the same. Maeve Carson stirred from the patch of dirt she'd claimed near the back of the supply barn, eyes raw from wind, lips chapped from another night breathing dust instead of hope. The scrape of boots outside jolted her upright. She tightened her coat, or what remained of one, more thread than cloth, around her frame. It did little to mask the bitter ache of the wind. The barn door creaked open and daylight knifed in sharp and sudden. She blinked against it, hand rising instinctively to shield her face. A figure stepped in, silhouetted in light, the shape broad at the shoulders, shadowed at the jaw. "I ain't here to throw you out," the man said. Maeve didn't answer. She'd heard promises like that before, usually followed by something worse. "I brought food," he added. She squinted at him, suspicion etched into every muscle. Then the scent hit bacon, not much but real, and warm. Her stomach growled without permission. The man stepped forward and handed her a tin plate, the heat radiating off it like mercy. She didn't thank him. Not yet. She stared up at him instead, noting the lines around his eyes, the calluses on his hands, the steady look that didn't waver when he met her gaze. "You got a name?" he asked. "Maeve." He nodded once. "John Merrick." She'd heard the name. Rancher, widowed, 3 kids, never came into town unless he had to. Folks called him a hard man, a quiet one, but quiet didn't mean cruel. Maeve had learned the difference the hard way. John sat on a nearby hay bale, hands resting loosely on his knees. He didn't eat, didn't offer more than silence. "I'm not staying," Maeve said, breaking the tension. "Just needed a place out of the wind for the night." "I know. I won't steal nothing." "I know that too." The way he said it, it undid her more than kindness ever had, like he believed it. "You were sleepin' here last week too," he said after a moment. Maeve stiffened. "Only a few nights." "I ain't here to shame you. I'm here to offer something." She looked up sharply. "I don't do that kind of work." John's jaw twitched, and for a second she saw something flicker in his eyes, pain maybe, or regret. "I got 3 kids," he said. "They eat what I burn and wear what I mend. I need someone who can cook better than me, clean better than a pack of wild dogs, someone who ain't afraid of early mornings or stubborn young'uns." Maeve's voice came quiet. "You offering work?" "I'm offering a place," he said. "With pay and a roof. You sleep inside, eat at the table, and if my kids don't take to you, we part ways, no harm done." She stared at him. A man like this, he didn't have to offer that, not to a woman like her. "There's women in town better suited," she said, trying not to sound bitter. "Ones who can still have more children." "I'm not looking for a wife," he said. "I'm looking for someone who knows what it's like to need a second chance." Maeve lowered her eyes, heart thudding so loud she thought he might hear it. She hadn't felt like a woman in years, more like a ghost walking roads where no one looked twice. The idea of warmth, of a chair at someone's table, felt foreign. "Why me?" John looked at her without blinking. "Because you didn't beg." That did it. Her throat closed. Her hands trembled as she clutched the tin plate. She hadn't cried in a long time. She wasn't about to now, but something inside her cracked. "You can ride?" he asked. She nodded. "My wagon's out back. We head north, about an hour's ride." Maeve hesitated only a second longer before rising to her feet. She left the plate half full. It felt wrong to take everything. The road north was quiet. Dry hills rolled beneath a sky bruised by late afternoon clouds. Neither of them spoke much. John drove the wagon, reins loose in hand, posture relaxed in a way that spoke of habit, not ease. Maeve sat beside him, coat drawn close, one hand resting on the splintered edge of the seat. Every bump in the trail reminded her how long it had been since she rode with a purpose. The house appeared just after a bend in the ridge, a modest two-story structure with a pitched roof and wraparound porch. Fenced pasture to the left, chicken coop behind. No sign of wealth, but everything straight, everything solid. Maeve's breath caught when she saw the children. They stood near the porch steps, a girl and two boys. The oldest, maybe 12, had his arms crossed and suspicion drawn hard across his face. The girl, 8 or 9, clutched a ragged doll and blinked up at Maeve like she was a story waiting to be told. The youngest, a boy of about 6, stood with a slingshot in one hand and dirt on both cheeks. "Kids," John said as he hopped down, "this is Miss Maeve. She's gonna be helping out." None of them said anything. Maeve stepped down slow, careful not to let the wear in her bones show. She offered a nod. "Hello." The girl was first to speak. "You smell like smoke." Maeve smiled and it surprised her. "That's 'cause I been sleepin' in a barn." The youngest snorted. The oldest didn't budge. "You'll sleep upstairs," John said, breaking the tension. "Room used to be theirs. They've since taken over my space like a bunch of prairie dogs." Maeve followed him inside. The house smelled of firewood and sweat, of long days and quiet nights. It was messy, lived in, but not neglected. Her room had a narrow bed, a cracked basin, a small window facing west. She dropped her bag, a single bundle of everything she owned, by the door and turned back to find John waiting. "I don't expect gratitude," he said, "just effort fair." "Fair? I rise at 4, breakfast by 5, kids out the door by 6, you up for it?" Maeve nodded. "I've been waking up earlier than that with nowhere to go." He gave a small nod, then turned to leave. Maeve barely slept that night. The wind moaned through the cracks in the frame, but it wasn't the noise that kept her up. It was the quiet, the strange absence of fear. For the first time in too long, she wasn't waiting for footsteps, for shouting, for someone to yank open a door and demand she move on. She lay still, hands folded over her stomach, listening to the slow breath of a house filled with life. Morning came cold and early. She was already downstairs when John came into the kitchen, boots thudding dully against the floor. "You don't sleep in?" he asked. "Not anymore." He didn't smile, but his nod said more than words. Maeve moved like someone trying to remember how to live in rhythm again. She stirred oats, cracked eggs, sliced bread. The youngest, Tommy, wandered in first, rubbing his eyes and dragging a wooden horse by the leg. He blinked at her, then mumbled, "Is the bacon burnt again?" Maeve handed him a plate without answering. He sat and ate like it was his first real meal in weeks. The others followed. Clara helped set the table. Luke, the eldest, remained guarded, eyes never leaving Maeve's movements. She didn't push. Children learn to trust in steps, not leaps. John left by sunup, taking the 2 older ones to help mend fence posts out in the east field. Maeve stayed behind with Tommy, teaching him to tie his boots, to sweep without flinging dirt into the corners. By midday, she had washed more dishes than she had in a year, and her hands were raw from scrubbing. But when Tommy giggled over a face he made in the suds, something warm lit in her chest. It felt dangerous. It felt like hope. Late afternoon brought a knock at the door. Maeve wiped her hands and opened it. A woman stood there, tall, dressed too fine for the dust-covered trail, her expression sharp as broken glass. Her gaze swept over Maeve from head to heel, and something cold settled in Maeve's stomach. "I'm looking for John Merrick," the woman said. Maeve didn't answer at first. Then, "He's out at the eastern field." The woman didn't budge. "Tell him Abigail stopped by, he'll know what for." Then she turned and walked away. Maeve closed the door slowly, heart pounding. She didn't know who Abigail was, but she had a feeling whatever that woman came for, it wasn't good. And it wasn't over. The door clicked shut behind her, but Maeve stood there a long moment, palm resting on the wood like it could steady the tremor running down her spine. She whispered the name under her breath, Abigail. No last name. No explanation. Just a look that sliced clean and the kind of confidence that didn't need to raise its voice to make trouble. Maeve had met women like that before, always wrapped in perfume and polished shoes, always walking through life like everything belonged to them, including the men. Tommy's voice called from behind her. Who was that? Maeve didn't turn around, just someone passing through. It was a lie, and she felt the weight of it settle between her shoulders like a sack of wet grain. When she finally turned, Tommy had gone back to his wooden horse, dragging it along the floor in a circle, muttering some imaginary battle. Maeve tried to shake it off, but she couldn't ignore the unease crawling beneath her skin. She finished the dishes with fast, methodical movements, as if the sound of scrubbing might drown out the questions in her head. By the time John returned with Luke and Clara, the sky was blushed with evening light, and the stew on the stove filled the air with the scent of thyme and onion. Luke slammed the door harder than he needed to, dropped his tools without so much as a glance in her direction. He didn't speak during supper either, though he cleaned his bowl and asked for seconds. That was enough for Maeve, for now. After supper, John lingered in the doorway, watching the sky as if trying to read what tomorrow might bring. Maeve moved beside him, slow, quiet. The breeze had softened, carrying the scent of mesquite and the low murmur of crickets. She came by, Maeve said without preamble. The woman, Abigail. John's posture didn't change. She say what she wanted. No, Maeve lied again. Only said you'd know. John sighed through his nose, deep and tired. I do. Maeve waited, but he didn't explain. She didn't ask. She learned that silence, if handled gently, could invite truth better than pressure. And sure enough, after a long pause, he said, She's my late wife's sister. That surprised Maeve more than it should have. The woman had the air of someone untouched by grief. She thinks I should have left this place, he added. Sold off the land, sent the kids back east to live with her family. Maeve tried to picture Clara, Luke, and Tommy living under that woman's roof. She couldn't. Why didn't you? He looked at her then, and there was no fire in his voice, only steel. Because this is my land, my children, my choice. Maeve nodded. She didn't seem like the kind to let go easy. She is. They stood together in the hush of twilight, and for a brief, fragile moment, Maeve felt like part of something again. Not as a guest, not as charity, but as a person with weight, with roots beginning to settle. But the storm didn't wait long. The next morning started like the one before, early, brisk, full of small tasks and silent observations. Maeve moved through it all with a rhythm that felt half borrowed, half earned. She knew better than to mistake comfort for permanence, but it didn't stop her from savoring the smallest victories, like Clara asking to help with the biscuits, or Tommy insisting she be the one to tuck him in. John was out most of the day, hauling supplies from a neighboring farm. The work left the house quiet, the kind of quiet that let thoughts creep in. Maeve found herself scrubbing already clean surfaces, adjusting and readjusting the drapes. She hated how much she wanted this life to last. By late afternoon, she was hanging laundry when she spotted the second visitor. This time it was a man. Clean coat, clean boots, mustache trimmed with surgical precision. He rode a black horse with a white blaze, and his eyes scanned the property like someone evaluating livestock. He didn't knock. He dismounted and walked straight toward her. Afternoon, he said. You Maeve. Her heart skipped. Who's asking? He smiled without warmth. Name S. Gerald Langston. I run the ledger up in Sweet Rock. Abigail sent me. Maeve stiffened. I don't have business with you. Maybe not, he said, but John Merrick does. You being under his roof, I figured it's worth the conversation. She wanted to walk away, but something about the man's gaze held her pinned. You should know, he said casually. There's talk already. About you. About what a woman with no family's doing around 3 children and a widowed rancher. Some folks figure he's just keeping you around till he don't need you. Maeve's face flushed, half from shame, half from rage. You got no call to speak like that. I'm just the messenger. Abigail wanted me to make something clear. John's not untouchable. If she decides those children are better off elsewhere, she's got the money and the influence to make it happen. Maeve's fists clenched in the laundry apron. Tell her to come herself next time. Langston tipped his hat. Suit yourself. He rode off, slow and smug. Maeve watched him disappear down the ridge, bile rising in her throat. She turned back toward the house, chest heaving with a pressure she didn't know how to release. That night she didn't mention the visit. Not yet. Not with John already worn thin from a long day's work. But the silence between them was different, heavier, as if they both sensed the air shifting. The following week moved like a slow-burning fuse. Luke continued to keep his distance, testing her in subtle ways, forgetting to wash his hands before supper, dragging mud through the house, challenging her corrections with narrowed eyes. Maeve never raised her voice. She learned long ago that control didn't come from shouting. It came from consistency. And over time, even Luke started to look less like a stray wolf and more like a boy trying not to break. Clara clung to Maeve's skirts constantly, asking questions, offering flowers, begging for stories. Maeve gave what she could, but the girl's hunger for affection was bottomless, and Maeve feared she might disappoint her one day. Tommy was the easiest. He followed her like a duckling, shared everything in his head, from dreams to secrets to what kind of pie he liked best. She loved him fiercely already, too fiercely. Late one night, after all the children were asleep, John sat at the table, oil lamp casting soft shadows against the window pane. He stared into his coffee like it held some hidden message. "Langston stopped by," he said. Maeve didn't flinch. "He talked to me too." John's jaw tightened. "I didn't know he would." "He said Abigail means to challenge custody." John nodded slowly. "She's tried before, backed off when I threatened legal action, but she's got influence now. She's waiting for me to give her an opening." "Then don't," Maeve said simply. John looked up at her. "You really want to stay in this mess?" Maeve's voice was steady. "I've lived worse messes. At least this one's got a roof and children who need supper." John studied her, and for the first time she saw more than fatigue in his eyes. She saw fear, not of pain or loss, but of hope. "She's gonna come back," he said, "and she's gonna try harder. Then she better be ready for a fight." Maeve left him sitting there, stunned. She walked upstairs, checked on each child, and curled beneath her own quilt with her heart racing. She hadn't fought for anything in a long time, but maybe it was time she did. 2 days later, the fire came. It started at the edge of the barn, where dry hay met a tossed lantern. Whether by accident or intent, no one knew. By the time the children screamed and John came running, flames had already licked their way up the walls. Maeve didn't hesitate. She grabbed the water bucket, screamed for Clara to take Tommy out back, and sprinted toward the blaze. John was there, axe in hand, chopping at the stall door. The horses inside shrieked, blind and wild with panic. Together they worked through the smoke, pulling animals free, stomping stray embers. Maeve's lungs burned and her hands blistered, but she didn't stop. Not until the last beam cracked and the roof caved in. By then the sun had set, casting a dull orange glow over the smoking ruins. The children huddled near the house, soot on their cheeks, wide eyes tracking every movement. Maeve sank to her knees, coughing, eyes watering. John knelt beside her, shoulders heaving. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded weakly. "You. Could have been worse." Then his eyes darkened. "Unless it wasn't an accident." Maeve's head snapped toward him. "You think?" She said she'd come back. The next morning, a stranger's boot prints were found near the edge of the barn, prints that didn't match any of theirs. They both knew what it meant. And Maeve knew the fight hadn't just begun. It was already here. Smoke clung to the air for 2 days. Even after the barn was reduced to a black skeleton, its ribs jutting up from ash like the bones of a creature too stubborn to die quiet, The wind carried reminders of what had nearly been lost. Maeve scrubbed soot from the children's cheeks every morning and watched them flinch every time a door creaked or the stove popped. Fear lived close to the skin now. It didn't speak, but it hummed beneath every breath. John worked without rest. If something could be salvaged, he salvaged it. If something needed replacing, he found the wood, the nails, the means. But what changed most was the way he looked at the horizon. Not like a man wondering about the weather, but like a man waiting for something, someone, to return. Abigail hadn't come back, not yet, but her shadow was everywhere. Maeve took it upon herself to bring calm back into the children's days, not with false smiles or forced cheer, but with presence. She kept routines firm, hands busy, voice steady. She told Clara bedtime stories that didn't end in fire. She let Tommy sit at the table while she cooked and listened when he talked about horses and heroes. She gave Luke space. Let him watch from afar. Let him measure her with those suspicious eyes of his. He didn't speak much, but he noticed everything. And then came the letter. John found it nailed to the gatepost one morning. No envelope, no seal, just 5 words scrawled in ink so sharp it looked carved. "I'm coming for what's mine." He showed Maeve without a word. Her breath caught when she read it, her fingers curling tight against the paper. "She's not bluffing," Maeve said. John didn't answer. He stood at the gate a long while, eyes fixed on the trail beyond the fence, as if daring it to produce the threat. "She doesn't want you," Maeve continued. "She wants them. She thinks I can't protect them." Maeve swallowed hard. "Can you?" His jaw tightened. "Alone, maybe not." She looked at him then, really looked. This man who had taken her in without asking for anything, who cooked badly but always tried, who never spoke about his grief but carried it like a second skin. He wasn't unbreakable, but he was unrelenting. That counted for something. "You're not alone anymore," she said. Something passed through his eyes, but he didn't speak. He only turned and walked back toward the house, the letter clenched in his fist. That afternoon, Clara came in crying. Maeve was washing linens when she heard the sobs and dropped everything to run. The little girl stood near the coop, her dress torn and blood smeared on her knee. "What happened?" Maeve knelt beside her. "I tripped," Clara sobbed, but Maeve could tell it was more than that. The way she looked toward the trees, the way she shook. "Did someone scare you?" Maeve asked gently. Clara hesitated, then she nodded. "A man," she whispered. "He was standing near the fence. He didn't say anything, just watched." Maeve's blood ran cold. She lifted Clara and carried her back inside, bolting the door behind them. She said nothing to the child, but her heart hammered as she cleaned the wound and soothed the girl to sleep. Then she sat in the dark by the window until John returned. When he heard what Clara had said, he went straight to the gun cabinet. "You think it's one of hers?" Maeve asked. "I think she's running out of patience." John cleaned the rifle with practiced precision. "She knows the law's slow out here. She doesn't want custody through court. She wants me to give up." "You won't." "No." That night they took turns watching the house. John on the porch, Maeve by the back window. The moon hung heavy, the kind that makes even still trees look like they're breathing. Around midnight, Maeve saw the glint of something near the far shed. A figure, brief, gone before she could shout. She ran to John. He was already halfway off the porch. Together they searched, rifles in hand, hearts in throats. But there was nothing, no footprints, no sign, only a worn fence post freshly broken. "She's testing us," John muttered. Maeve looked into the darkness. "She's gonna push harder." And she did. 2 days later, a man from the county arrived with papers. Maeve watched from the doorway as John read them with his jaw clenched tight. "She filed an emergency motion," John told her after. "Claims I'm unfit, that the kids are unsafe." "She started the fire," Maeve snapped. "She didn't sign her name on that." Maeve paced the floor. "What do we do?" John looked up at her, and this time he didn't look like a man carrying everything alone. He looked like someone ready to draw a line in the dirt and hold it. "We show them the truth." Maeve's mouth opened, then closed. She knew what he meant. He was going to town, into court, into her territory. The next morning was tense. The children clung close. Luke, for the first time, didn't glare. He hugged his father's side before John rode out, and his eyes flicked to Maeve with something resembling trust. "Don't let anyone in," John said before he left, "and don't wait for trouble." Maeve nodded. "You do what you need to, I'll do what I know how." The day stretched long. Maeve taught Clara how to mend a tear in her sleeve. She helped Tommy carve a stick into the shape of a horse. She kept Luke busy hauling water and counting chickens, anything to keep his mind occupied. But as night fell, Maeve couldn't shake the weight of waiting. John didn't return that night. And when morning came, his horse was found tied to the post outside, without John on it. Maeve ran outside barefoot, her breath catching in her throat. The horse was lathered with sweat, eyes wide. It had come back alone. The children appeared behind her. Clara whimpered. Luke grabbed Tommy's hand. "What happened?" he asked. Maeve turned to him, heart pounding. "I don't know." But she had a feeling, a sick, cold certainty. Something had happened in town, and John wasn't just missing, he was taken. Without wasting a second, she gathered the children inside, bolted every door and window, and pulled John's spare rifle from the cabinet. Her hands shook as she checked the chamber. Loaded. Clean. She had no one to call, no law to trust. Just 3 children, a burning ache in her chest, and a promise she'd made to a man who had never asked her to prove herself, only offered her a place to begin again. Maeve wasn't about to let it be stolen. By sundown, a note appeared. Pinned to the chicken coop door, a single sentence. "You were never part of this." Maeve read it aloud only once, then she burned it. Luke stood at her side, eyes wide. "What are we gonna do?" Maeve looked at him, at Clara, at Tommy. "We're gonna hold the line," she said, "just like your father would." They slept in the kitchen that night, all 4 of them. Maeve kept the rifle across her lap, eyes fixed on the door. She didn't rest. She didn't blink much. She listened to every creak, every groan of the house, and prayed without words. When morning came, she opened the door and stepped outside for the first time. And found tracks. Boot prints leading around the side of the house. A broken shutter. A scratch across the doorframe, like someone had tried to force it open. She followed the tracks as far as the woods, but they vanished in the undergrowth. Maeve returned to the porch and stood tall. John was gone. His children were afraid. Abigail had made her move. But Maeve Carson had found something out here, something worth protecting. And God helped the woman who thought she could take it from her. The wind came in sharp the next morning, slicing down from the hills like it had a purpose. Maeve stood alone on the porch, rifle slung across her back, apron strings still tied from breakfast she couldn't finish. Her eyes scanned the horizon, not for weather, but for movement. The sun had risen full, but no warmth came with it. John was still gone, and the tracks she'd found near the coop haunted her like whispers in the walls. Behind her, the children were quiet, too quiet. Even Tommy, who usually couldn't sit still longer than 5 minutes, now stayed curled up with his wooden horse pressed to his chest. Clara refused to go upstairs alone. And Luke, he kept glancing at the door every time it creaked, his jaw clenched like he was bracing for something. Maeve knew that kind of fear. It was the kind that burrowed deep, that taught children not just to be silent, but to expect loss. She wouldn't let them feel it again. By midday, she'd gone through every drawer, cabinet, and hidden place John had ever shown her. She laid out all the ammunition on the kitchen table, counted every round. 2 rifles, 1 revolver, enough if it came to it. She kept the revolver tucked under her apron now, and Luke watched her every move, absorbing more than he let on. "Can I help?" he asked. Maeve turned to him, surprised. I can keep watch, he said. You always send us inside when you're outside. I ain't scared. Maeve studied him. He wasn't lying. The boy had his father's eyes, hard when they needed to be, but not cruel. All right, she said, but you listen to me close. You don't shoot unless I tell you, and you stay where I can see you. Luke nodded, solemn and eager in the same breath. That afternoon, they set up a routine. Maeve patrolled the perimeter with Luke shadowing her steps. Clara helped clean the dishes and kept Tommy occupied with whispered games and drawings made in the ashes on the hearth. Every hour, Maeve checked the horizon. Still no John. Still no word. Until sundown. Maeve was folding laundry on the porch when the rider came. Not galloping, just slow, deliberate steps. The kind of approach that told you the man on the horse had nothing to prove and plenty of time. She didn't recognize him. Long brown coat, hat pulled low, horse built for distance, not speed. He stopped at the gate, tipped his hat like he was arriving for supper. You Maeve Carson. She stepped forward but didn't come down the steps. Who's asking? Name S. Burke. I was hired to deliver a message, that's all. He pulled a folded note from inside his coat and held it out. Maeve didn't move. I don't mean harm, Burke added, sensing her tension, but I was told to tell you something else, off the page. Her fingers tightened at her side. The man you're living with, John Merrick, he's alive, but he ain't free. He's being held in Sweet Rock. Maeve's stomach clenched. By who? Burke hesitated. He didn't say her name, but I reckon you already know. Maeve stepped down and snatched the letter from his hand. Burke nodded. He said to tell you bring the law, don't bring a fight, just come. With that, Burke turned his horse and rode off without waiting for a response. Maeve stood frozen, the letter still unopened in her hand. Her heart pounded so loud she barely heard the wind anymore. She forced her fingers to move, unfolding the paper. John's handwriting was hurried, uneven. Maeve. She's got power now, friends in town. She paid someone off and they took me after court. Said I'm being investigated for endangerment. It's a lie. You know that, but lies carry weight when you have silver in your pocket. I don't know what she wants exactly, but she said your name. Said you, never belong here. Said I'm the fool who brought a stray into his home and expected her to act like family. Don't believe her. I do believe in you, more than I should maybe. Tell Luke to hold steady. Tell Clara she's braver than she knows. And tell Tommy, tell him I'll fix his horse when I get back. If I don't get back, you know where the deed is. You know how to keep them fed. That's more than I ever managed before you came. But don't come if it'll get you hurt, please. John. She folded the letter and slipped it inside her coat. That night she didn't sleep. Instead, she packed. One dress, John's revolver, a tin of biscuits, a folded photograph of the children John had tucked into the back of the cupboard, back when he still thought he had to be strong and secret, and in her apron pocket she kept the deed, just in case. Before dawn she left Luke in charge. You're the man of the house till I return, she said, gripping his shoulder. You know the rules. No one opens that door till the sun's full and high, and if anyone comes before that anyone, you take your siblings and hide in the root cellar. Understand? Luke nodded, eyes glistening but jaw set. Will you come back? Clara asked, voice small. Maeve bent low and hugged her. Not coming back's not an option. She kissed the top of Tommy's head. He wrapped his arms around her neck so tight she could barely breathe. Bring Papa home, he whispered. She looked into his eyes and nodded. I will. And with that she mounted John's spare horse and rode. The trail to Sweet Rock was bone dry, but the wind picked up near the ridge, sending dust devils twisting through the canyon like bad omens. Maeve rode fast, the revolver tucked against her thigh, hidden but near. She had no plan, only a purpose. Sweet Rock didn't sleep early. The saloon lights still burned when she arrived just after sundown. The streets were quieter than usual, though, like folks were waiting for something to happen. She dismounted, tied the horse behind the bakery, and walked toward the sheriff's office. It was locked, dark inside, not a soul to answer. That's when she heard her name. Miss Carson. She turned. Abigail stood on the porch of the boarding house across the street, dressed like a preacher's wife, smiling like the devil with a teacup. I thought you might come. Maeve didn't move. I offered you a way out, Abigail continued, gave you warning. You took him, Maeve said. No, Abigail replied coolly. The county did. I simply told them where to look, where a broken man was harboring his children with a stranger whose name carries no legacy, no family, no value. Maeve crossed the street slowly, carefully. You're not doing this for the children. No, Abigail admitted. I'm doing it for legacy, for reputation. You see, it's not enough to have land. One must be remembered, and John was so willing to waste it all for pity. Maeve stopped a foot away. Where is he? Abigail tilted her head. You really want to trade your freedom for his? I'm not asking again. For a long second, silence thickened between them. Then Abigail sighed like she was humoring a petulant child. Behind the stables, she said. He's in a cellar, guarded but not well. Maeve's hand drifted to her apron, to the revolver hidden beneath. Careful, Abigail said. That kind of loyalty gets women killed. Maeve leaned close, only if they stop short of finishing what they started. And with that she turned and walked away. She didn't go straight to the stables. She circled behind the general store, waited in the shadows, watched. 2 men guarded the side entrance. One tall, one slouched like he'd had more whiskey than rest. They smoked, laughed quietly, didn't even look toward the alley behind them. Maeve moved fast. She slipped through the rear gate, crept along the stable wall, and crouched by the cellar doors. A padlock held them shut, but the slouched man had been careless. His ring of keys still hung from a hook by the water barrel. She moved like breath, stole them without sound. When the lock clicked, the taller guard turned. Hey. Maeve raised the revolver. Don't, she said. He froze. The slouched one tried to move, but she turned the gun on him just as quick. I won't shoot unless I have to, she said, but I won't miss if I do. They backed away. She flung the doors open and descended the steps. John sat chained to the wall, blood dried on his lip, one eye swollen, but he was alive. He looked up blinking, and then, Maeve. She didn't speak. She dropped to her knees, hands working fast on the chains. You shouldn't have come, he rasped. I told your boy I would. And that was all. Together they climbed out into the night. But the ride home wouldn't be clean. Not with Abigail watching from behind the curtain. And not with the sound of hooves already echoing down the street. John swayed in the saddle. He hadn't said much since they left Sweet Rock behind, and Maeve didn't ask for more than she needed. The bruises on his ribs, the swelling around his jaw, the split at the corner of his eye, they all spoke loud enough. She rode beside him, eyes darting to the trees, to the bend in the trail, to every patch of open dirt behind them where hooves might show. The horse she'd taken from Sweet Rock was skittish, and the moon above gave little help. They traveled by instinct now, and silence. When the cabin finally came into view, just a smudge of shadow against the darker sky, Maeve breathed for the first time in an hour. She could feel the children's pull from here, like a rope knotted around her ribs. Her legs ached from the ride, her fingers numb from how tightly she'd gripped the reins, but none of that mattered. They had made it. Luke was already outside, rifle in hand, barefoot and shivering in the night air. He didn't wait for questions. He dropped the rifle and ran straight to his father. John barely caught him with one arm before they both sagged to the ground. Luke buried his face into John's chest, and though the man winced at the pain, he didn't pull away. Clara stood in the doorway, her doll clutched against her chest, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Tommy peeked out from behind her, his eyes round and red. Maeve slid off her horse and walked toward them slowly, her throat tight. She reached the steps and dropped to her knees, holding her arms open. Clara rushed into them. And for a moment, just a moment, the world held still. Inside, the fire was still alive, low and soft. Luke had done well. He'd even boiled water and set out blankets. Maeve helped John ease down onto the floor cushions by the hearth. She fetched a wet cloth and cleaned the blood off his face, her fingers gentle despite the tension running beneath her skin. "You shouldn't have come for me," John murmured. Maeve didn't respond right away. She wrung out the cloth and touched it to his split lip again. Only when she was certain she wouldn't cry did she answer. "You asked me not to, but you wrote that letter like a goodbye." John winced, not from pain, from guilt. "I couldn't let them lose you," she added. "I couldn't let you get hurt," he whispered. Maeve paused. "I've been hurt before. This time I had something to get hurt for." John's eyes searched hers then, really looked at her, like she was someone he hadn't let himself see fully until now. His hand rose, touched hers. But whatever might have been said next was shattered by a knock at the door. 3 soft raps. Then silence. Maeve shot to her feet, rifle in hand before the sound had even finished echoing. Luke grabbed Clara and Tommy, herding them into the back room. John tried to rise, but pain rooted him in place. Maeve stood at the door, chest rising and falling like a war drum. She didn't speak, she didn't ask. She flung the door open and raised the rifle. But it was Abigail. It was Burke, the messenger from Sweet Rock. His hat was gone, his hair soaked with sweat, one arm wrapped tight with a strip of bloodied cloth. "They're coming," he gasped. "I tried to hold them off, tried to lead 'em wrong trail, but they're hours behind me, maybe less." Maeve grabbed him by the collar and pulled him inside. "Who?" "Langston," Burke hissed, grimacing in pain, "and 2 bounty men. Abigail paid 'em to bring John back dead or alive." John's face went gray. Maeve turned to him. "How long do we have?" Burke collapsed against the table, panting. 4 or 5 hours, not more." Maeve's mind raced. The barn was gone. The horses were tired. No neighbors nearby for miles. Running was no longer an option. They'd have to stand their ground. "I'll help," Burke said, trying to sit up. "You've done enough," Maeve told him, already pulling blankets down from the loft and stuffing them against windows. "Rest while you can." John groaned as he tried to stand again. This time Maeve helped him up, wrapped his ribs with a strip torn from her old coat, and shoved the revolver back into his hand. "You still remember how to shoot?" John looked at her. "I remember enough." Maeve turned to Luke, who had returned from the back room with his jaw clenched tight. "You remember what I told you?" Luke nodded. "Root cellar, don't wait. Take them now. I'll call for you when it's over." He hesitated. "I want to help." Maeve looked at John. "He stays." John met his son's eyes, then slowly nodded. "He stays." Maeve knelt and pulled Tommy and Clara into a hug. "You two be brave now," she whispered. "Luke's gonna keep you safe." Clara kissed her cheek without speaking. Tommy gripped her hand like it was the only thing tethering him to earth. Then they disappeared into the dark mouth of the cellar, and the trapdoor closed. By the time sunrise broke the sky, Maeve had already fortified every point she could. The front room became a barricade of tables and firewood. The kitchen window was boarded with shelves and nailed pans. She filled water jugs, laid out all the ammunition, checked every firearm twice. John leaned against the wall, pale but upright. "You sure about this?" he asked. Maeve nodded. "I didn't come this far to watch you get taken in chains." "They'll kill us." "They'll try." Burke stirred, eyes opening groggily. Let me take first shot. Owe her that much. Maeve passed him the rifle with the smoothest trigger. Then aim clean, she said. They heard the horses before they saw them. 3 of them moving slow. Abigail wasn't there. Of course not, she didn't get her hands dirty. But Langston was, smiling like a man stepping onto property he already believed was his. He didn't dismount. John Merrick, he called. You're under arrest by order of the Sweet Rock magistrate. Maeve stepped onto the porch, rifle raised. Langston raised an eyebrow. You think this ends well for you? I think it ends here, she said. Behind him, the bounty men fanned out, trying to flank. Burke opened the window, just wide enough to line up a shot. Maeve caught the motion and gave him a subtle nod. Langston sighed. We'll take him by force if we have to. Won't be my fault if bullets start flying. You've got kids, woman. And they've got me, she replied, voice like gravel. Langston motioned. The bounty on the left spurred his horse toward the side door. Burke fired. The man dropped. The horse reared and galloped off. John stepped forward, leaning heavy on the door frame, revolver steady. Langston drew his weapon, but not fast enough. John fired. Langston cried out, gripping his shoulder, his gun falling to the dirt. The last bounty man froze, hands half raised. I ain't paid enough for this, he muttered. He turned and rode off without another word. Maeve walked down the steps, rifle still raised. Langston glared at her through pain and blood. She'll come, he spat. Abigail, don't stop. Maeve crouched beside him. Then tell her next time, don't send cowards. Langston tried to lunge at her. Maeve clubbed him across the face with the rifle stock. He dropped like a stone. Behind her John stood, breath ragged, eyes wild. Burke lowered his rifle, bleeding again. Maeve walked back to the cabin, every step slow and steady. She opened the trapdoor. The children blinked up at her. It's over, she said, for now. They scrambled up, dirt-smudged and wide-eyed. Tommy ran straight to John. Clara clung to Maeve. Luke stood beside them, fists tight at his sides. John sank to the ground, arms around all 3. Maeve stood nearby, watching the morning sun climb higher. But inside she felt it. It wasn't truly over. Because Abigail Crowley hadn't yet lost. And the kind of woman who fights for control doesn't accept defeat. Not when blood has been spilled. Not when pride's been wounded. And especially not when there's a woman standing in the place she once called hers. The wind shifted again that afternoon, the kind of shift Maeve had come to know too well, a silence not of peace but of coiled intent. It moved through the trees like a breath held, the clouds thinning into high streaks as if the sky itself was watching. The cabin, once a place of recovery, now felt like a stronghold. The floorboards creaked louder. Every hinge seemed to echo. And though Langston lay bound and bruised in the woodshed, guarded by Burke and stripped of every weapon, Maeve knew in her bones that this wasn't over. Not yet. John sat at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee untouched before him. His arm trembled slightly where the bullet wound had been dressed, and bruises bloomed purple along his ribs, but his eyes were clear now. Alert. He'd come back to himself, back from whatever pit Abigail had thrown him into. Yet every time he looked at the children, some shadow passed over his face, something bitter. Guilt, maybe. Shame for being taken, for letting them see him weak. Maeve, meanwhile, had no time to unravel the grief inside him. She moved through the house with mechanical precision, checking locks, reinforcing windows, pulling supplies into piles and rechecking the root cellar. Her hands never stopped. If they did, her mind would start, and she couldn't afford that. Why isn't she here yet? Luke asked that evening, his voice barely above a whisper. Maeve didn't answer right away. She was peeling potatoes, but the blade slowed in her hand. "She wants us to let our guard down," John said from the table. "She's waiting for us to fight each other instead of her," Maeve added. Luke nodded as if he understood. Maybe he did. The boy had grown faster in the last week than most kids did in a year. Burke came in near sundown, wiping blood from his lip. Langston had tried to bite him during a water break. The man was tied tighter now, and not even the chickens looked at him when they passed the shed. Still, Maeve kept the children away from it. Some rot didn't need to be breathed twice. Later that night, when the children were asleep and John was dozing in the chair by the fire, Maeve stepped outside and sat on the porch alone. She kept the rifle across her lap, the stars above sharp and silver. The wind had a sound to it like boots crunching over dry leaves. She listened closely, then realized it wasn't wind. Someone was approaching. She stood fast, raising the rifle. But this time, the figure that stepped from the shadows wasn't armed. It was a girl. No older than 17, barefoot, clothes torn, her face was dirty and one eye swollen shut. She stumbled forward, hands raised. "Please," she rasped. I didn't know where else to go." Maeve moved quickly, dragging her inside before the cold or whatever followed her could arrive. John woke instantly, his hand reaching for the revolver, but Maeve waved him off. "She's alone," she said. The girl collapsed onto the floor by the fire. Clara stirred from the loft and came down, rubbing her eyes. "Who is she?" Clara whispered. Maeve didn't answer. The girl didn't speak again until the warmth soaked in. "My name's Junie," she said, teeth chattering. "I was working at the Crowley estate, kitchen help. Abigail, she don't treat help kindly. I ran when she started talking about sending more men here." Maeve's blood ran cold. "How many?" "She's hiring 6, Junie said. "Not local, guns for hire. They're riding from Bitter Hollow. Should be here by the end of the week." Burke swore under his breath. "John didn't move, and she just let you walk out." Junie shook her head. "I stole her horse, traded it for a meal and a ride halfway. Been walking 2 days. Maeve got her water, bread, and a blanket." "She'll come with fire next time," Burke muttered, "and bullets." "Then we won't wait," Maeve said. John looked up. "What do you mean?" "She wants us cornered. We've been defending, waiting, reacting. It's time we make her come to us." John frowned. "She's got money. She's got men. All we've got is a house barely holding together and 2 rifles." Maeve's voice didn't waver. "We've got something she never will." "What's that?" Maeve looked at the children, huddled close, wide-eyed but trusting. She looked at Junie, bruised but alive. She looked at John, battered but still standing. "We've got each other." That night plans were made. Burke would ride north to Sweet Rock under cover of darkness. He knew a few old friends who hadn't yet sold their soul to Abigail. He'd get letters, names, affidavits, evidence of the bribes, the threats, anything to give to the circuit judge when he passed through in a month's time. John would stay, guard the house, protect the children. And Maeve would go to the Crowley estate. John tried to stop her. "That's suicide." "I'm not going in with a gun," she said. "I'm going in as bait." "You think she'll talk?" "I think Abigail Crowley's pride is the one thing louder than her money. She'll say exactly what I need her to say." John stared at her a long time. "And if she does?" "Then I'll get out, one way or another." Burke left before dawn. Maeve left just after. She wore a clean dress, hair braided back, no weapons visible. She borrowed John's old mare, the quiet one, slow but steady, and rode without looking back. The Crowley estate sat on a hill surrounded by cottonwoods, white fences, and horses that cost more than most cabins. Maeve walked straight to the front steps and knocked. The butler opened the door and blinked at her. "Tell Abigail she has a visitor." "She's not seeing anyone." "She'll see me." Minutes later, Abigail appeared at the top of the stairs in a deep crimson dress, sipping tea like the war hadn't touched her at all. "Well," she said, "I must admit I didn't expect you to come crawling." Maeve didn't rise to the bait. "I came to make a trade." Abigail laughed. "You have nothing I want." "Don't I?" Maeve said softly. "You want them gone, me gone, John gone. But if I leave today, if I take them and disappear, you can have the land, the house, everything." Abigail arched a brow. "Why would you do that?" "Because I'm tired," Maeve said, letting her shoulders slump just enough. "And I'm not their mother. Maybe you're right. Maybe I never belonged there." She saw it then, the glint in Abigail's eyes, the satisfaction, the arrogance. Maeve leaned closer. "But I want to hear you say it." Abigail sipped her tea. "Say what?" Maeve stepped up to the top stair. "Say you had John taken. Say you paid those men. Say you set the fire. Say you tried to ruin a family because yours fell apart and you couldn't stand to see someone else build something you lost." Abigail's face darkened. "You think you're clever. I think you're bitter, and I think you've already lost." Abigail dropped the cup. It shattered. "You don't belong," she hissed. "But I stayed." "You're nothing." Maeve leaned in until their noses nearly touched. "Then why are you so afraid of me?" She turned and walked away. Behind her, she heard Abigail scream. The entire ride back, Maeve's heart pounded, not from fear, but from the knowledge that the trap had been set. Now all she needed was proof. And a witness. Burke returned 2 nights later. He had names. He had signed letters. 2 men swore they were paid by Abigail to falsify court records. 1 clerk admitted to backdating a signature. And Maeve, she had her own weapon now, the conversation. Because Junie, brave, wide-eyed Junie, had followed Maeve that day. And from behind the cottonwoods, she'd heard every word. They weren't finished. But now they weren't hiding. They were ready. Because home isn't the walls that keep the wind out. It's the people you choose to fight for. And the family you build from the ashes. The storm didn't come with thunder this time. It came with dust. Dust kicked up by hard hooves, by too many riders moving too fast down a trail that had seen enough grief already. Maeve stood at the window and watched it rise like smoke on the ridge, a brown haze curling toward the ranch. She didn't blink, didn't breathe. Behind her, the cabin was quiet but not still. John sat at the table, a fresh bandage across his chest, hands gripping the rifle that used to belong to his father. Luke stood beside him, no longer asking permission to stay in the fight. Burke loaded rounds at the hearth, checking each cartridge like a priest preparing for judgment. And Junie stood near the door, battered and young, but with a spine straight as a fence post. The children were below, down in the root cellar, the latch sealed tight. Maeve had kissed each one on the head and told them stories they'd never forget if this was the last day they saw her face. But she didn't let her voice tremble, not once, because a house without fear is stronger than any army with it. "They're early," John said. Maeve nodded, watching the dust line advance. "They're eager." Burke snapped a chamber shut. "Means they're sloppy." John looked over at her. "You sure about this?" Maeve's voice was quiet. "I'm done running." They all were. The riders came into view just as the sun split the clouds. 6 men, all dressed in dusters and rifles slung low. In front, a man in a black hat rode tall in the saddle, his face thin and tanned like rawhide, teeth flashing as he saw the cabin. Another rider broke for the trees, disappearing from the line. Only 3 left now, and one of them was bleeding from a shoulder hit. The man in the black hat was shouting orders, but no one was listening anymore. Maeve stood tall on the porch again. "You still think this was worth the coin?" she called. The man turned toward her and raised his weapon. She fired first. He crumpled backward off his horse. Silence fell like a hammer. The 2 remaining riders stared at the cabin, at the porch smeared with blood, at the bodies cooling in the dust. Then they turned and rode, fast, cowards without cause. Maeve exhaled for what felt like the first time in hours. Burke whooped from upstairs. Junie sobbed. John stumbled out the door, still clutching his ribs. But Maeve didn't celebrate, because she knew Abigail wasn't done. Not yet. The smoke was still curling from the spent cartridges when they found Luke. He came back leading the flanking rider by the wrist, disarmed, bruised, but alive. The man looked more scared of Luke than anyone else. "Boy came at me like a bear," the man muttered. Luke didn't smile, he just shoved him toward the woodshed. "He can sit with Langston." John clapped his son on the shoulder, pride and pain mixing behind his tired eyes. Maeve watched them, watched how Luke didn't need praise, he just needed to be trusted. Clara and Tommy were brought up from the cellar, blinking against the daylight. Clara ran into Maeve's arms, her face buried in the folds of her dress. Tommy just stood there, wide-eyed. "Did we win?" he asked. Maeve crouched and looked him in the eye. "We're still here," she said. "That's winning enough for today." Later, John took Maeve aside as she was boiling water and cleaning wounds. "I need to say something," he said. Maeve didn't stop working. "Go on." "I should have seen it sooner, what you are, what you've done." She glanced at him. "I'm just a woman who cooks and fights when she has to." "No," he said. "You're the reason this place didn't fall. You're the reason my children still believe in something." She looked down at her hands, stained red and black. "You think this is what I wanted for my life?" she asked. "To be in a war every day just to prove I'm worth a place at a table?" John reached out, gently took her hand. "I don't want you to prove anything. I just want you to stay." Maeve swallowed hard. "You don't want a wife who can't give you more children." John's gaze didn't waver. "I want the woman who gave the ones I already have a reason to smile again." The words hit her deep, deeper than she was ready for. She tried to look away. He wouldn't let her. "You told me once I didn't have to do it alone," he said. "I'm telling you now, neither do you." She didn't answer, not with words. But her fingers curled tighter around his. That night the fire burned low. The children were asleep, Junie tucked into a cot in the loft, Burke snoring against the far wall. Maeve and John sat on the porch, watching the stars, rifles still nearby. They didn't speak much. They didn't have to. And then, without warning, a rider appeared on the hill. Alone. White horse. No dust this time. Just a slow, steady walk. Abigail Crowley. She stopped just outside the gate, didn't dismount. "I see I underestimated you," she called. Maeve stood. "You did more than that. You've made my name a joke in Sweet Rock. Half my staff's fled. My accounts are being examined." "Good," Maeve said. Abigail's voice sharpened. "This won't hold. You think a few signatures will stop everything I've built." Months passed, then years. The children grew. Clara took to singing, and by 12 she was leading hymns at church. Tommy built traps and fences and declared he'd be a rancher like his father, except richer. Luke left at 16 to apprentice with a blacksmith, promising to send home money and letters. He did both, without fail. Junie married a kind man from Bitter Hollow who respected her past and marveled at her strength. She visited every month, always bringing pie. John and Maeve weathered each storm, side by side. Through drought, through wind, through grief when the old mare died, through laughter when Tommy fell in love with a girl 2 years older and refused to speak for a week after she moved away. And when John's hands began to stiffen with age, Maeve took over the ledger. When Maeve got fever one winter, John slept beside her chair every night, feeding her broth with shaking hands. They weren't perfect, but they were whole. One day, years later, Tommy found a box in the loft. Inside were old papers, faded photos, the deed to the ranch, and Maeve's first apron, stained with ash and soaked in history. "What's this?" he asked. Maeve smiled, brushing dust from her knees. "That," she said, "is proof that what's broken doesn't stay broken forever." He looked at her, confused. "But you never gave me life." Maeve knelt in front of him. "No, sweet boy, I gave you mine." The past never fully left. Maeve still woke some nights thinking she heard gunfire or a horse too close in the dark. John still sometimes sat by the fire with his hands folded, staring into nothing with eyes that remembered too much. But they had survived. More than that, they had lived. Not just under the same roof. Not just as a man and a woman trying to outrun ghosts. But as family. And in the quiet of that old house, when the wind turned warm and the grass glowed gold in the afternoon, Maeve would sometimes sit on the porch, hands folded over her lap, and smile. Because once she had been nothing. A barren widow with no name and no place to rest her head. And now, she was mother, wife, protector, and home. She was Maeve Merrick. And that name meant everything.